I'm thrilled to be starting this new chapter with MICCI's family. Always remember that a seed grows with no sound, but a tree falls with huge noise. Destructions had noise, but creation is quiet. Last but not least, together we are stronger. Let us perform issues quietly, but ensure our voice being heard surely. Thank you.
Hi everyone, warm welcome to another session, Riveting One, by MICCI and Crow Expert Hour. The Malaysian International Chamber of Commerce and Industry brings again to you very riveting subject matters on taxes, debt restructuring, etc. So today's topic is about restructuring your company's debt during this challenging pandemic period. And it is indeed quite challenging, and there are a lot of companies that are struggling, especially those in the tourism sector. You need to stretch your dollar a bit more. It's sustainability, even though the business have picked up and a lot of orders have even come in through to the manufacturing sector, but it is always the bloodline, the cash flow that keeps you from going to greater heights or even sustaining, right? So maybe today we have an interesting Miss Wong, female from Crow, to share some of her thoughts in restructuring your company debts. And Miss Wong is corporate. She's a director with the corporate advisory at Crow Malaysia. Her experiences includes financial due diligence, reviews, valuation of businesses, review of profit and cash flow forecasts, project management for IPO of companies. She has been involved in, as usual, Crow experts in various corporate insolvency related administration, receivership, etc., etc. And this is going to be her valuable advice on how things that you can look forward to, what things that you look out for in restructuring your debts. The Chinese adage saying that if you have 10 walks and only 9 covers, then it's about shifting where you want to cover. And it can detract a businessman from actually running his business to keep it sustainable during these challenging times. Right, over to you, Ms. Wong. Are you ready?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, the floor is over to you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Sean, for introducing. Let me share the slide. Hi, okay. Good morning.
I'm sorry to question. I'm supposed to give a bit of a housekeeping rules.
You continue first?
Yes, those that have logged in via Zoom, you can post your questions down in the chat below. And those that is watching from Facebook, do also ask questions and post it on the messenger. I'm sorry for this disruption. You just jumped the queue. Okay, back over to you, Ms. Wong.
Okay. So everybody can see the slide, right? Okay. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this webinar. I'm Fee Mei from Crow Advisory Sdn Bhd. Today, I would like to share with you on the topic of restructuring your company's debt during the pandemic. So since the MCO in place in Malaysia, many non-essential services businesses are facing mismatch of income and expenditure, whereby they are forced to stop operations or unable to generate much income, if any, during this period. However, financial obligations remain outstanding, and there are no clear indication of when the business will return to normal. Because of the current chaotic economic landscape, businesses facing financial difficulties need to be more well-versed in dealing with their debts, especially those businesses having huge borrowing and inability to repay, mainly due to loss of major customers, serious business downturn during this economic landscape, and also withdrawal of financial support from their banks. With all these unprecedented challenges of managing distressed debt, both lenders and creditors will need to explore available options such as restructuring that can help maintain them as going concern. So today I would like to share with you on an informal self-rescue plan that actually I'm working on currently. And the common informal self-rescue plan for distressed companies include negotiation with your creditors, your landlord for lower down your rental, your suppliers, and your lenders. Cost cutting, such as reduce headcount, cut back overheads, and try to focus on profitable operation, dispose of or close down any loss-making of division, sales of any surplus or unused asset. Okay, let's start. The next slide, the content. Basically, today we will go through the introduction to the debt restructuring. Then we will show you how can we assist you. Then question and answer. So now let's go through a brief introduction of the debt restructuring. It actually mainly helps business to repay its debts, analyze the multiple methods to repay its debts, understand and implement the debt restructuring strategy and process. The main objective of a debt restructuring exercise is to be able to pay its debt. What do you mean by able to pay its debt? So we shall go through later. So also we will have to explain to creditors a restructuring is better option as compared to winding up the company. To be very, very frank, if there is no ability to pay the debts, then a debt restructuring is not a viable option. So this slide actually shows you a simple roadmap to a debt restructuring exercise. First, you need to identify the asset and liability of the company and prepare a financial position assessment of the company. This is to show the creditors that in a liquidation scenario, what is the recoverability to the creditors? Secondly, you need to identify cash flow. What is the availability of cash flow for the business? And based on this cash flow or funding that available, design a scheme to address the debts of the company. Then you will have to present and evaluate the feedback from the creditors and subsequently negotiation with the creditors or lenders to come out on an agreement of the plan. After you obtain the agreement from the creditors, then you can formalize the plan either on a settlement agreement or a court sanction. It all depends on what mechanism that you adopt to restructure your plan, your debts. So let's go into more detail on financial position. So financial position assessment is where you identify and assess the financial of the company. First, you need to identify all the asset and liability of the company. Asset is like property, plant and equipment, inventory, debtors, cash and cash equivalent. Liability is like trade creditors, other payables, or bank borrowing. After you have identified all your asset and liability, you have to estimate the realizable value of your asset. Normally it's based on market value or fossil value. So you will have to try to get valuation report. But if a valuation report is not an option, then you might need to go to website to get, like for property, you can go to iProperty to get an estimated market value of the property. For motor vehicles, maybe you can go for Buddha.com. So any publicly available information. However, the most important thing is we must be able to provide justification for the estimated realizable value. And sometimes for property, we don't even use the market value. We might use the fossil value, or even sometimes apply some discount on the fossil value. Because as in the liquidation scenario, it's like a fire sale. So you might not even have the fossil value. For motor vehicle, we also normally will apply a discount on the market value that we obtain from the website. Other asset is like a computer, office equipment, furniture and fittings. All these normally we will estimate as zero because it actually doesn't have much value if the company is under liquidation. Then you will have to review the contract with the suppliers or bankers, the loan agreement, to get the terms of the borrowings and security, if any, in order to prepare the position assessment following the Companies Act, the priority ranking of the creditors. And also we also need to identify if there is any contingent liability or capital commitment or any commitment. This is normally through discussion with management to identify if there is any corporate guarantee provided, then or there is any penalty or compensation. So based on all the review and assessment, prepare a financial position assessment to understand the company position in the event of liquidation. What is the recoverability of all the stakeholders by its creditors, bankers, or the owner? So the next slide is the identify cash inflow and outflow. So the cash flow, either the cash flow is internally generated cash flow from operation, the cash inflow from operation and cash outflow from operation. Try to see whether we can increase any inflow from operation or decrease the outflow for operation in order to improve the financial position of the company. For example, a hotel operator, there will not be much cash inflow during from operation during this pandemic period. So even now, where the interstate is just allowed to travel, initially when it's restricted, basically no tourism is allowed. How do you increase your cash inflow from operation? Cash inflow from operation is basically almost zero, as during that period that nobody can travel, nobody will stay into the hotel. Even for the F&B section of the hotel, they can't compete with the online platform like GrabFood or Foodpanda for convenience sake, or rental of the convention hall for meetings, weddings, or function, which is also not allowed during that period, as there is no way to increase cash inflow from operation. So on the other side, we might need to reduce cash outflow for operation. So what kind of cost can we cut? Maybe we can get the staff to come in half a month so that we cut half of the salary. But even if you cut half of the salary, there is still outflow. So the obligation is still there. In addition to that, maybe there are also costs of repair or all the necessary costs like water, electricity. So eventually, there will be not enough operating cash flow. Then we will look for other source of inflow, whether from loan or from shareholder or whether the company need to raise new money or not. So in Avilion case, they actually have a few rounds of private placement to raise new money to support the operation during the pandemic period. So the next cash inflow is realization of non-core asset or those idle asset or disposal of non-profitable operation. The non-core asset is like your sport car, your bungalow for vacation, which is not in use, not essential, or any idle fixed deposit. So actually currently I'm working on a self-rescue informal plan of debt restructuring. So the company actually have about 250 millions of debts with the bankers. And the non-core asset is around 70 million. So, and also a FD of about 10 million. So instead of addressing the debts of 250 million, we can actually dispose the non-core asset and pay down the loan accordingly. So after you pay down the loan, what you need to address is only 170 million instead of 250 million. Next is capital injection. Either it can be from owner, from the white knight, if any. So that the case that I'm working on, actually we have identified the white knight, the new investor. The white knight is willing to come up with a 10 million advance. And this 10 million in advance actually helps them to kickstart the operation so that the business can start generating cash flow from operation. And then we can work out the cash flow projection and assess how to address the debts accordingly. So now is the restructuring part. Okay, a restructuring is actually mainly to buy time for you to pay your debts. So it's either by the repayment terms, where you can defer your repayment, increase to a longer period to repay the terms, or try to get a moratorium period for you to have a breathing space. Then the second resort is to go for haircut, where cost cutting discounted on the repayment terms or lower interest rate. And then you also can consider a debt to equity swap. But a debt to equity swap, which you can convert your debt to equity, but then you will lose some equity interest. And also this is only meaningful if for listed company, as the share that you have offered to the creditors can be traded easily. Under this method, basically the creditor must have a way out, that means able to sell their share. So the other form, maybe a redeemable preference share can work out. It all depends on the situation. And the case that I share with you, we have actually requested a 6-month moratorium, means there is no repayment for 6 months. And as because the white knight have injected 10 million, so this 10 million is for them to kickstart the operation. That is why this moratorium period is really important in order for the company to generate enough operating cash flow to be self-sustained and put themselves into a better financial footing. And we also have requested interest rate cut from the bankers in order to be able to repay the debts in the fixed period, which in my case, I have requested 5 years, 60 monthly installment. So here is where you defer the repayment and also increase the repayment term to a longer period. If all this deferment or increase a longer period of repayment term, also we can't fulfill the financial obligation that owe to the creditors, then we have to try to request for a haircut. So the case that we actually, after we have designed the scheme, everybody actually will get back 100%. It's just that a longer period and a deferment and a moratorium. But then we were informed that it's actually a contingent liability of about 130 million, which is 50% of my debt increase. So if I admit the contingent liability of 130 million into the unsecured debts of the company, the cash flow that will available to address the 250 billion will not be able to pay it, because from 250 plus 130 is 380. So what can we do? The cash flow that is available is basically only enough to address this 170 million of debts. So we have actually revised the plan, designed a plan with the haircut. We have submitted our plan to the contingent liability creditor and pending their approval. So we shall see what will happen. We don't know yet. So, but in the event, let's say the banker do not agree with the haircut, then what can the company do? So it might need to go to the liquidation road. But the thing is, if you can see there is a future, that actually the company can address the debts with the future business, you might maybe want to go to CDRC, because the main creditors now that we are addressing is all bankers. And CDRC will have a say and mediate between the bankers and the company. But if let's say no choice, you have to go into liquidation. So when we do the position assessment of this company, the recoverability is less than 10 cents. So every $1 you owe, they will get less than 10 cents. And even if, let's say my scheme now is only asking a 40% haircut, it's definitely in a better position than a 90% haircut. So it's really up to the banks. They will have to weigh and assess the situation. But of course, my guess is a 60% return in 5 years is better than a 10% return in unknown period. As in liquidation, we are uncertain when can the company realize all the asset, then only can then distribute to the creditors. All these methods that I've shared need to be evaluated based on situation. There is basically no one plan suits all situation. Okay, now back to the example, the hotel operator. So that is a future business. Once, like now, the traveling is allowed, everybody is rushing for a holiday. Even myself, I'm planning a holiday. So people will start travel. Business actually can improve. So there is a viable business. So a restructuring is amicable. We will have to work out a scheme for the hotel operator to defer the repayment until the operation can be regularized and able to repay the bankers and or supplier. So let's say if the company actually, the hotel operator owe you 10 million now, which the company cannot pay, there is no info that they can't fulfill the financial obligation. However, if the business come back, like traveling allowed, then they can actually have an operating cash inflow. So what they need is just time. So they can request a defer in repayment until the business is regularized. And also based on the operating cash flow available, design a scheme. And based on the ability of the company to repay the debt. So it may be a deferment of debt, such as a deferment for the next 3 or 4 years with 3 million a year installment to address this 10 million debts. This may be a workable plan that is to prolong the repayment term. So basically, a restructuring plan is where you must have the ability to pay the debts in future. If there is no ability to pay this debt in future, you may ask for haircut. But if your haircut is actually so much so that is in a liquidation scenario is better, then the restructuring plan actually doesn't work. Then you will go to liquidation. So let me show you for another example, which is the AirAsia X restructuring scheme. Briefly, let me summarize the proposed debt restructuring scheme of AirAsia X. The total scheme creditor is 64 billion. The proposed settlement is 200 million, which actually translates to about 0.3 cents for every $1 owed to the scheme creditor. 99.7% haircut. And the repayment tenure is 5 years. Moratorium period for the first 2 years. Repayment will only start 3rd year, first installment, 4th year, second installment, and final and 5th year, the final installment. Interest of 2% per annum non-compounding basis. And for the fundraising part, where there is a proposed right issue of 300 million, every 9 rights for 5 consolidated shares, and a proposed share subscription of 200 million is a new share. So total fundraise is 500 million. And this is mainly for working capital requirement for the next 24 months. So this working capital is needed mainly include the aircraft activation costs, trade and other payable, you will need them for your operation, salaries, as well as operating expenses incurred in day-to-day operations. Where this is the time period they buy the 2 years moratorium for them to be able to generate sustainable cash flow for the business. Then they address the debts in the next 3 years. So another point to take note also, in the AirAsia X plan, they will actually provide some travel credit to the passenger for future travel. for those customers which had already purchased flights or placed deposit with the Asia as prior to the scheme. So you can see how the Asia X actually adopt the restructuring method that I have just shared. First, you must have a viable business. So the airplane business must start, and that's where they raised 500 million. This is for them to regularize their operation, to have a sustainable business. Then a moratorium period, where I have said deferment payment, a moratorium period of 2 years, and also the term out, they only start to pay in third year to fifth year. So this is basically increase the repayment term. So all this term actually is based on the ability of the operating cash flow available to address the debts of the company, and of course the haircut of 99.7%. So this is basically a brief summary of the AirAsia X proposed restructuring scheme. They have actually obtained the shareholder approval in June 2021, and they also obtained the extension of the restraining order for another 9 months from June 2021. But they have yet to conduct the court convey meeting. We shall see and wait for the result, see whether the court convey meeting, whether the creditor will buy into the scheme or not. So next, okay, negotiation. So once we have the plan ready, we can actually present to the banker or the creditor and start negotiation process. Get the feedback from the lenders or bankers, and evaluate the feedback to check whether the company can accommodate the request from the lenders or the creditors. Then continue to fine-tune the plan based on the feedback obtained. So generally, the main negotiation point is around the repayment term, interest rate, haircut. For bankers' point of view, they will normally request for additional security to improve their security position, higher interest rate in order to generate better profit for their portfolio, or to appoint. They might request to appoint a monitoring accountant. Basically, they want to monitor the implementation of this restructuring plan, and so on. So for formalization, under this informal self-rescue plan, after negotiation with the lenders and creditors, the company can actually sign an agreement with the lenders or creditors, or to obtain a revised letter of offer from the bankers. Under the formal measures such as CDRC, the Corporate Debt Restructuring Committee, there should be normally a debt settlement agreement executed between the lenders and the company. The others formal measures such as corporate voluntary arrangement and the scheme of arrangement, a court convey creditors meeting will be held, and to obtain a court sanction on the scheme, and it will bind all the creditors under the scheme. So the case that I'm looking at is actually an informal self-rescue plan. This method was chosen is mainly we are able to get most of the bankers' agreement on the scheme. So that's why the reason that we choose a self-rescue plan, because to save cost and also time. The next slide, just to show you briefly what is the major differences between the various mechanisms and the pros and cons between the different mechanisms. The informal self-rescue plan mainly suitable if you are able to negotiate with the respective lenders or creditor for the time that you need for the deferment, for the moratorium. In the case that I shared earlier, we using this one because we actually have the support from most of the lenders and also the creditors. And this will actually, the good thing is we will save some cost, and because there is no court involvement. However, the problem is there is no automatic moratorium, or there is no option to apply for restraining order, and it actually does not bind all creditors. The next mechanism I want to share is the Corporate Debt Restructuring Committee. With the criteria for you to apply for CDRC is actually you must have at least 2 financial institutions, that means 2 banks, outstanding to 2 banks with a total outstanding of more than 10 million. And the CDRC actually act as the mediator between the banks and the company. This CDRC actually set up by the government of Malaysia. And when you have applied to the CDRC, there actually no action can be taken by the bank. They can't serve you notice of demand. They can't do anything. It's actually automatic moratorium for the bank only. And the cons is you can't apply it to CDRC and get a moratorium for all the other creditors. So this is mainly suitable for the debts arise from financial institution. The scheme of arrangement. Actually, the scheme of arrangement is previously the Old Companies Act 1965 is under Section 176. I think maybe most of you have heard. The New Companies Act 2016 is actually under Section 366 or 368. So any company actually can apply and they can bind all the scheme creditor and you can apply for an RO. RO is I think under 368. Initial period is 3 months. You can apply for extension for another 9 months. The bad thing on this is you must need 75% support from various classes of creditor. And also it's more expensive and complicated legal procedure. You will have to need to apply to court for the scheme. You have to need to apply to court on the RO. You will have to apply for the court convey meeting. Then you will have to apply to court to get the sanction on the outcome of the meeting. The last that I want to share is actually corporate voluntary arrangement. This is very, very similar to scheme of arrangement. It binds all creditors, immediate moratorium for 28 days, and extension of 60 days. It's a simple and faster compared to scheme of arrangement because it's a very minimum court involvement. What you need to do is you just need to, after you have conveyed the meeting, get the result and obtain the court sanction on the result, and it actually binds all creditors. The con is actually you also need 75% from all the creditors and more expensive as compared to self-rescue and CDRC. The major point is not applicable to public company with secure creditors, or company regularized under the Bank Negara Malaysia or the CMSA. Okay, how can we assist you? So our services under the transaction advisory side, we actually do the equity of business valuation. We also perform financial due diligence, feasibility studies, and government advisory. Under the merger and acquisition, we actually strategic advisor for the buy side and the sell side or joint venture arrangement. We actually can introduce or look for potential buyer or seller, depends on the situation or depends on the needs. Financial advisory and transaction management. Transaction management actually, that's where we help you to manage your transaction, whether a buy side or sell side transaction. I have done a few sell side transaction management. Basically, we will help the seller to address all the questions raised by the potential buyer and their advisors, such as the financial team, the legal team, the operation team. This mainly because their current workforce doesn't cater for this additional time that you need to spend to address the question that raised by the potential. So you get a third party to help you to manage. They will liaise with your accountant, they will liaise with your sales manager, we will liaise with your operation and actually accounts team or legal, so that here is the central information control center. Okay, insolvency services. Basically, I'm leading the insolvency services in Crow Advisory. Mainly is the liquidation, whether it's a provisional, court, creditors, or members voluntary liquidation, even a receivership appointed by court or by the power of debenture, and restructuring, debt restructuring and a scheme of arrangement pursuant to the Companies Act 2016, or even a monitoring accountant. We also can help. So basically, have ended my sharing session. So now let's go to the Q&A session. Okay. I think I have a few questions sent to me earlier. Okay, the first question is actually, would the government roll out a similar setup like Dana Harta in the past? Okay. The need for another similar setup of Dana Harta is actually quite obvious at this moment. But the bailout for the businesses are going to be many, many times more compared to the previous crisis that happened in 1997. So where the government of Malaysia actually set up the asset management company, which is the Dana Harta, to battle the financial crisis at that time. So over the lifetime of Dana Harta of about 7 years, from 1998 to 2005, the Dana Harta portfolio about 52 billion, and they managed to recover 30 billion about. So after 7 years of operation, and they ceased in December 2005 and transfer the remaining asset of about 3 million for collection to Prohas. So, and Dana Harta actually has been described as a successful example for a national asset management company in the reports published by the agencies such as World Bank, Bank of International Settlements. It's actually recognized as having a strong legal authority, appropriate pricing, politically backing, adequate financial support, and clear mandate. So it has been noted that Dana Harta's recover total will actually improve by including the NPL. It actually managed on behalf of the government, as these loans did not require payment. This loan has higher recoverability and than the acquired asset. So but of course, this all depends on the government direction, and it might come in next year, the following year. That one I have no comment. So the second question, how does a company bridge the disconnect between bankers, lenders versus borrowers in the pursuit of a debt restructuring when all else fails? Okay. Based on the earlier sharing, it really has to assess which is better situation. We table out the scheme to the lenders. If in liquidation, this is what you get. Now I come up with this scheme. This is what you get. So you have to convince the bankers or the lenders that my scheme is definitely in a better position compared to liquidation. So if everything you can't convince, basically the banker will think that liquidation is better. So then actually you can't, if the banker doesn't buy your business plan. So, and I have of course emphasized a lot on a sound future business is essence for restructuring plan to work. The third question is, what is the level of buy-ins and commitment by the banks or lenders vis-a-vis profit expectation by the shareholder or stakeholder to agree to that restructuring? Actually, this is really depends on the situation. There is no hard and fast rule saying that, oh, I can only give you 20% haircut, anything above that, I don't accept. It's not, it really depends on situation, especially for bankers. If you can demonstrate that you have considered various scenarios and there would be a best scenario for all stakeholders, which is the creditors, the bankers, and the owner, that's where everybody will have to think this will be the best scenario. that's where you actually can push the scheme through. So I think I have addressed all the 3 questions that I have in hand. So I will pass back to you, Mr. Sean, to see if there is any other question.
Right. Thank you, Ms. Wong. Quite lengthy and in-depth. I have a few questions here. You raised the point about Dana Harta, and there's something quite similar, not entirely. It's the COVID Act, aka the Temporary Measures Act. How does it come into play with your restructuring schemes?
Actually, the COVID Act also allow you to defer. You can actually now, even under the monitoring of the Bank Negara, the bankers now actually have the direction from Bank Negara. They will be more lenient in giving you the deferment, the moratorium. You actually have the time to buy until, I think, end of this year to buy the moratorium. So this is all the government measure that they have, the temporary measure that they have at this moment. So it's easier for you to talk to the bankers now to come up with a scheme.
Okay, so the COVID Act or the Temporary Measures Act is basically keeping the hounds at bay while you configure your prepare your so-called scheme, right? Yes. Which is where the next thing that I want to talk about is that in order for you to present your scheme, it is actually selling your scheme to either your creditors, which includes the banks, right? As you go into a negotiation and you need to have some bullets, right? Okay, one of them that you highlighted is that if you're able to demonstrate or show that somewhere in the near or immediate future there is a sufficient cash flow that comes in, right? So that's something that you need to demonstrate. Now, how much leverage would a haircut be in terms of a negotiation? Is a give and take, right? If you do not show that you're willing to do any haircut, does it actually have a bad signal to your creditors or your bankers?
Who? The haircut from who?
From the debtor. So if you're going to do a scheme and try to convince your creditors to say, hey, please stay with me and continue what, but I do not offer a haircut.
To you?
To myself, yeah.
No, cannot. Actually, the owner, that means you are talking about the owner.
Yeah, owner, yes.
Owner will be the last. Definitely will be the last. You have to, the owner will be after the scheme. After the scheme. That means if my scheme is 5 years, the owner only will get addressed after 5 years.
No. What I'm just saying is that, let's say my company, I needed to come up, I'm presenting a scheme to my creditors, right? And I say, all right, this is my operating cost, this is how much in debt, I need to restructure for future cash flows, blah, 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 okay? But part of my scheme, I do not offer a haircut. That means that I will try to cut down on expenses. My Mercedes-Benz, I still went and bought a Mercedes-Benz,
Cannot.
Is it it's more palatable to for acceptance of your scheme if you show that you actually do a haircut? That's
correct. Basically, you have to demonstrate the commitment, the owner.
Yes.
First of all, you have to demonstrate the commitment. Now the company, the business actually in trouble. Or everybody will be in trouble. The owner will hit the most. So the owner actually have to demonstrate they have actually more haircut than the bankers.
Correct.
Either you sell your Mercedes-Benz, you reduce your salary, you put in advances to make the business, kickstart the business. You have to show your commitment. Without any commitment, it's very, very hard to convince the banker.
Okay, right. So, okay, exactly. That's what I'm just saying, that when you go into a negotiation, you have to show, that you are really genuine about it, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So in terms of, I know that tourism sector has been quite heavily impacted. Most of them, like the hoteliers and stuff like that, they are really, really impacted. So as part of the scheme to demonstrate the light at the end of the tunnel, I presume things like future hotel bookings would be a good indication.
Okay. Of course, order book is always the best because you already have the booking in hand. But even if you don't have it, you can make a assumption based on the industry study or whatever to make your projection.
A trending, I guess.
Yeah, a projection. Because you need to demonstrate you know your business and the business actually is recovering. How much is recovered? You have to justify your basis for your cash flow projection. That is where your inflow, remember, I talked about your future business inflow. You have to have your basis and assumption ready for challenge. That's where you need to have justification that you actually, my business is coming back. That's why I just need time. Just give me the time.
I am aware of, for example, your example of airlines, right? It's a bit tricky because you might be able to demonstrate that the travel business will open up, and then you will get certain passenger loads and etc. But the problem is there is a lot of credit. That means that there are already
The travel credit, right?
seats already booked. That means that it doesn't mean that from next year I have plane loads and 100%, and these are generating me the revenues, because I need to not to refund, but I'm going to need to have maybe 50% of the plane is actually paying my credit, my book, people who booked earlier. Yeah?
Correct. Where I said that they actually give you a travel credit.
Yeah.
So you can book through the travel credit, which it doesn't generate income to me because it's a credit. So in your projection, you have to address that also.
Yeah.
That's where you sell when you sell your scheme, your projection must be able to address all these things. Then you have to see, like what you say, maybe only 50% is actually cash. The other 50% actually is travel credit. It doesn't generate cash flow.
True.
Yeah, so that is why maybe they need 2 years. I don't have the preview of the projection, but that's why they need 500 million and they need 2 years before they can actually repay the debt. But a 99% haircut, I think, I don't know whether nationals, so is they can accept it. This one really have to see the outcome.
Yeah. The Malaysian International Chamber, we used to sit in monthly engagement with Bank Negara together with the bankers, and it was during the initial parts where, like you said, the loan moratoriums, and you're saying that the bankers are very open. Yeah, in a way, bankers are saying that a bad debt is bad for business for them, right? So they still also need to make sure that their borrowers survives. Okay, so that's one part. The other part of it is banks are also a profit-making entity. Okay, now the thing that we couldn't reconcile during those days was that how lenient would a bank be in evaluating a situation? Have you had any experiences, when you brought up schemes with the bankers? Were they open arms?
The different banks have their own different agenda, first of all. And then the NPL also does actually affect their performance. So how lenient it is, it really depends on their bank position, their bank themselves, the position. So whether they can take this, it will affect their ratio.
So the risk appetite, so to speak.
Yeah. So it all depends.
Correct. And this is where the International Chamber has been bringing up back to the Bank Negara, the Reserve Bank, that even if the bankers were to say, hey, look, we are going to be very lenient about it, but they are also strapped with their Basel II compliance, with the credit scoring, the traditional way of scoring. It sort of doesn't give quite comfort that the banker will say, oh, no problem, bring it to me, we are very lenient.
I
I
don't
don't think really, right?
I don't think so.
Like you say, they have their own credit, the risk profile.
Correct.
And that's where my catch 22 is. Okay, so if you are, let's say, in the furniture business in the Kepong area, for example, right? And you know, in the interim, I have cash flow issues because it was all shut down. But then there's demand online, and I haven't delivered yet, right? So me and my industry, so to speak, in Kepong, in the furniture business, goes to the banks and say, hey, let's restructure this, okay? And then somewhere along the line, up at the bank's credit risk or something department, say, hey, you know, I've got a huge amount of queries coming in from the furniture sector in Kepong. So will that actually trigger within the banks to say, hey, alarm bells goes and say anything which is furniture related in Kepong has got a downgraded rating. Yeah. So it doesn't prevent that, right?
It doesn't.
And it's not transparent. They don't need to report to Bank Negara about it, right?
Yeah, we will know. We will know.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So we have some questions also coming in. Yeah, the $64 million question here is, how does Crow charge for those services that you do to help them restructure? Is a methodology, you know, by percentage?
It's actually methodology. That means based on the actually number of hours, see how much work that we need to involve. And based on the time cost, we will work out a fee code.
Okay, so it's about a matter of number of hours, the complexity.
Correct.
Complexity may mean that I have the same complexity as another company, but my restructure is 10 million. The other guy is 100 million, but both same amount of work. So he pays let's say $100. I also pay $100, but mine is only 10 million. His 100 million. So it works that.
Supposingly is that way. That means we will find out, let's say the 100 million one, we will actually our time cost is $100. But for the 10 million one, our time cost also the same is $100. But when you look at 100 million and 10 million, you will feel that the owner for the 10 million, I might give them a bit of discount because the debt that they need to address is not as much as the 100 million one.
Okay, right. So it's not like very innovative. Very innovative lah. You say, okay, never mind, it's not 100. By right, it should be 100, but I'll charge you 50, and then 5% of the total restructured debt.
Yeah, but of course it cannot have below that lah. Anything below which, if we are not making profit, then that definitely cannot.
Okay. Wait, let me read this. There is a Mr. Chan who said that AAX owners have demonstrated sufficient commitment to their creditors, when in fact they have benefited billions of disposal of profitable ventures. Okay, we need to separate between owners and entity, right?
Yeah.
And again, like what I just said, in order for your scheme fly, you as the owner will also need to demonstrate some action, right?
To me, I call it commitment.
Commitment.
You have to show the commitment before the banks actually will even think about it, assess about it. If you have not, then it's very hard. They will say that you have no commitment. How can I even believe that your future income is there?
AAX is okay, a different animal.
Yeah, that one different. Just want to share how the methodology was adopted in the scheme only.
Because AAX wasn't actually money making from day one. But AirAsia, I think it's quite a different animal when they want to restructure, because it was demonstrated historically that it's, you know, very, very viable business. as I say, as you have mentioned, is sustainable future cash flow, which then gives you a bit more leverage in negotiations.
Negotiation.
Okay, I don't think there is any more questions. Maybe I just add a few things that I came across. There are two things. If all else fails in your restructuring, there's also an option, not really an option, okay? I will call it a bridging option. While you are negotiating something or you have already presented to the banks, and the banks are, evaluating, processing, and doing the legal, when you do legal documents and you're doing all your debts. In the interim, that you may need a shortfall. So this is like a bridging finance that you may need. So there's some very innovative new products out there, and I've just saw one. I think it's in the peer-to-peer lending space. Okay, it's not very long term; it's shorter term. Of course, like anything with risk and thing, it's higher interest rates, but the so-called amount of time for them to evaluate, and it's also a matching. What it means is that I have private individuals or corporates who would place funds with this peer-to-peer lending platform. And then if you need this funding, okay, so if your scheme actually did work and the banks are evaluating, of course, they take time to go to do their duty and do the legal documents to do so. So that means that you have a very good solid case, and then you can place it into this peer-to-peer platform, and then these individuals will then finance you in the interim. So there is actually such thing. If you're interested, drop me a line. MICCI, it's one of our members that does this kind of things. I think you have seen, maybe individually you have seen this too, but it's quite interesting. It's been used quite heavily. Okay. Then there's something else which is very personal, which is for the more towards the SMEs, SME owner operator. We are talking about credit cards. There is also a untapped credit facilities sitting in your credit cards. Most of the owners are, maybe a majority may have privately used their cards to the hilt, but there are a lot of business overheads that actually don't take cards. Example is a rental. You can't pay your landlord using your credit card. Yeah, there's a lot of all this kind of stuff. So how do you do this? And there's also, again, there's another fintech company that actually is in this area of this sweet spot between when the date that you charge to the card, there's a free credit period until the next statement, right? And then when the next statement comes, there is also a period for you to pay, right? So there is this little window of free credit that you can actually use, and these people they leverage and monetizing that little space that you do. That's also something that you might be able to look at, but it's not huge numbers like the 100 millions. You're talking about smaller. I know the peer-to-peer lending goes up to even 10, 20 mil. I've seen it quite easy to take out. And the matching or the lending, if you are what they call in credit scoring terms, let's say a rated company, within minutes money will be given to you, or within minutes someone would have financed you. Yeah. And even I've seen one which is a C rating, 2 hours, within 2 hours you get it. So don't know, that's something which you guys can mount, right? Don't seem to have anything else, and we have done about 1.5 hours. That's quite good. Fime, have you got any takeaways here before we end this session?
Okay. Okay. Basically, if you want to do a restructuring, the most important thing is you must have a viable business, and you can convince the banker that the scheme is definitely better than winding up. That is why you want to restructure your debts. So viable business, future income, sustainable business is all that is the main thing that you need to have before you can even start to negotiate with the bankers.
Okay, viable, right? I mean, that's really a no-brainer. But you have seen during the last few months and last half year, there's a lot of good, solid brands that has been, let's say, here for generations. They have closed. So, question would be: does brand equity has some value in the scheme?
Brand, it definitely have, but because of currently the economic landscape, it's actually go haywire. You can't even value the brand anymore. The brand value is different. Everybody now, even investor, the risk appetite, everybody is different. So it's a little bit hard to value it now, the brand. So I don't know, there are a few that actually closed down the very old famous brand. It's actually very sad. Seriously very sad.
I guess that's where the question that was raised about the disconnect between the banker and what's really sentiment. That's why then you have two. Well, as I say, I can't say that a peer-to-peer lending platform is equivalent to a bank, but then maybe the peer-to-peer platform has a better appreciation of brand equity. More individuals and
you really have to see the time that you need to buy and see whether you can turn around within this time.
I guess the first ones that you can talk to is actually your creditors, right? Because
Yes.
These guys are so embedded in your business that he actually knows your stuff rather than a cold person who's remote from you, right? So I guess that's where you should start, right? This friendship that you have in establishing with your suppliers, because maybe there's a takeaway here from also my personal businesses in the old days is that the people tend to bully suppliers because you are supplying to me, right? So I bully you and I don't treat you well because you have to beg for my business. So now when it comes to this place that now you're debt, you need to pay them, they're chasing and hounding you, right? So maybe my takeaway for everyone who's listening here is that, it's not only about your customer, you have to also be nice to your suppliers. If you're nice to them, they understand you, they will stick with you. Okay, all right, so that's all for today. Again, keep a lookout for the MICCI Crow Expert Hour. More interesting conversations that's going to come across. Very practical sharing of some of those anecdotes of life experiences. Okay, thank you, Wong Fime, and everyone else who have joined here. Okay, see you next time. Okay, bye. Cheerio.
Thank you.